They're calling him tonight Tampon Tim. All right. Now, sounds to me like that might be the kind of name that catches on, that maybe begins to go viral. I've seen a lot of tweets about it, a lot of X posts about it. Anyway.
Hi, I'm Ana Marie Cox. Welcome to 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. It is day 81. 81 days to the presidential election. And here to talk about that with me is Anna Sale. She is the host of Death, Sex, and Money, which I usually flip that order somehow, but I got it right that time. And also the author of Let's Talk About Hard Things. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's always telling who wants to say sex before death. It tells me something about the person when they get the podcast name wrong.
It's because it's been so long since I've had it. That's it. I've had a lot of death. Just money will always come last for me. But yeah, no. Well, that brings us to something I wanted to talk to you about. Which is sex related. It's in the same general category, which is, I think this is the period election, Anna. So we have the Republicans trying to make a slur out of Tampon Tim. I just don't, we already know they don't understand women.
Yeah. For anyone who has ever not had the needed supplies, and you're trying to denigrate from somebody from making sure we are protected.
I mean, even the having them in boys' bathrooms, the first thought I had was that, well, they're somewhere at least.
Yeah.
If I was, I mean, again, everyone who's ever had a period has had the fear of not having supplies. So Tampon Tim, my savior, I want them to put it on a t-shirt. I would buy the t-shirt. And then also recently we had, JD Vance didn't say this. It's started, people are kind of talking about it as though he was the one who said this, but I believe it was said on a podcast that he was on, which is the whole purpose of postmenopausal women is to take care of, I don't know if it grandkids specifically or just take care of children, something like that. So we're talking about periods. Anna, you just had a whole week of talking about periods. Perimenopausal week. Yes.
Yeah.
Interestingly,
our cycles of life.
Someone asked me, "Oh, does that mean what does that mean about your period?" And I was like, "Oh yes, no one knows."
Yeah, I feel like perimenopause is a very cool term we're throwing around a lot, but in fact, I learned it means that you're noticing some symptoms of hormonal changes, but still having your period at least once a year. You're not menopausal until you've gone a year.
Right. And it says something about the medical establishment that menopause has a super strict definition, right? It's not like a thing that you go through. It's like, oh, you haven't had your period in a year? You're menopausal. Great. Congratulations. Yeah. I went 9 months without getting my period. So my doctor wasn't going to give me hormone replacement because I didn't reach that magic
year.
Yeah.
You know what? You can just make up when you had your last period. That's what it's all based on. What you tell them.
I'm in a program of rigorous honesty. I don't know why it didn't occur to me that I could just lie. Literally, Anna, I had never thought of it.
I don't think I've lied, but I'm always you're asking me, I can't quite remember. And you're basing when my baby's going to be due on this, whether I'm perimenopausal. I don't really remember, I don't know. I that's what I find so weird, that it's pegged to our memories of the first day of our last period. So much of our treatment.
And we've mentioned both these things and haven't talked about reproductive rights being also an enormous part of this election. But we're talking about, so do you think there's been some shift in culture that the words abortion and period are now on the news all the time? And IVF is another thing. Reproductive rights are central to democracy, I think, personally. I don't think you can have freedom without reproductive freedom. But it's always been couched in things like saying reproductive freedom.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, it's the Democratic Party thinks they can win if they can just keep saying abortion, abortion, abortion based on the last midterms. I mean, has it been a cultural shift? It's interesting because a lot of the JD Vance stuff that has been dug up is from 2021 or 2022. I don't think it's new in the last few months, but certainly we're all figuring out, like, what does it mean? It's just I feel like we're in a new phase of thinking about how we talk about family and women's choices and reproductive freedom. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily new, but I do think we're in a new era. We're in a new phase.
Well, you're the taboo expert, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a taboo expert, and I'm also sensitive to when I can feel myself being manipulated by talking point, consultants. And so, I think that framing the election around abortion serves the Democratic Party. So I think that's why and I have been paying attention to, like, who says reproductive rights and who says abortion and who says reproductive freedom. I think Governor Whitmer says reproductive freedom. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. The, like, none of your damn business line, now that Tim Walz is talking, like, that's interesting. Like, none of your damn business is the opposite of abortion not being taboo. It's saying it's so private, you should get out of, or it's a different, maybe it's not the opposite, but it's a different tack. So I just think it's all interesting.
I'm interested. So the last person we talked to for the show was Betsy Hodges, who's from Minnesota, and we talked about the use of the word "interesting" and how that has, like, several different meanings, especially in the Midwest. And so I'm gonna try. It's weird. I'm now really self-conscious about using the word "interesting." Is what do we really mean?
Tell me what you hear.
I mean,
I'm noticing it, and I haven't formulated an opinion. I feel like maybe interesting is saying I'm like highlighting it in my little book of things I'm noticing, but I don't know if it's highlighted in a, like, I'm for this or I'm against this, or I think it's problematic or whatever. It's like, I'm just noting this is happening.
And I'm noticing a place where my experience is different
Uh-huh.
around the use of this language, which is that, I haven't covered politics, like, on a day-to-day basis in a while. But I have done more volunteering in the past few years. And also I wrote a big piece for Texas Monthly about the faith community's activism around access to abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And the activists say abortion.
Mm-hmm.
The activists say reproductive freedom and reproductive justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about the idea of politicians using that word to manipulate me, what I think of is they're using that word because the way that people who actually really think and care about it have changed the way that they talk about it. Mm-hmm. And some of that is around getting people to shift their thinking. But it's not like, oh, it's poll tested. Like, I guess I'm not just super, there's a reason to be cynical about all politicians, but they're also signaling an allegiance to a cause that I care about. And I'm like, yeah, signal that allegiance, motherfucker.
So it's working for you.
Signal it.
I don't mean when I say manipulate and poll tested, I guess it's what part I pay attention to what parts of me different politicians are trying to call forth.
Right.
If you talk about abortion and reproductive freedom, you're calling forth my experience as a woman in this world and as a parent of daughters and as somebody who's, knows that the body that I live in is, like, really much more complicated in the ways that it's talked about in the public sphere. If you talk about affordability, on the other hand, a whole other parts of me come forth as somebody who struggles with imagining what the future of our community is going to be like in the Bay Area of California. So I don't mean, like, to say abortion isn't important if it's a poll-tested talking point. I'm just saying I'm aware of that. I think that's part of the reason why abortion is it is such a prominent part of the political conversation right now, because it is a major part of the argument of the Democratic Party right now for why they should win elections.
Do you feel cynical about the way that politicians talk, like, just in general? Is it your desire that they not do that? Like, what would be the ideal situation for
No,
Anna Sale in the world.
No,
Like,
I don't think I don't think I'm
poor
cynical.
communication of political leaders to Anna Sale. Like what?
Yeah, I think this is less about me being cynical and more about how I'm oriented to the political conversation. And that's coming from being a politics reporter who sees myself as like the person taking notes on the sideline. And obviously I have, I don't mean to suggest that I'm objective in but I come from that like old school, like, oh, they're doing this in order to have this turn out in this way. I'm just watching their strategy. And so maybe that's cynical, but it's also what's happening. And then I notice, like, how does that track with what the conversations are with people who are in my peer group, with my parents, with my kids? Where are what they're telling me I ought to be worried about? Is that consistent with what I actually am talking about, what I feel worried about or hopeful about?
I think that's a really important distinction between what are they telling me I should be worried about versus what I am worried about. Although the what I am worried about part is a window into your personal experience, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think at just some point, like I crossed a bridge or broke a bridge or burned it or something.
Collapsed a bridge.
I was walking across a bridge and I started jumping up and down on it. Where like I can't separate out how this will play or what are they trying to do from like what I see and how it affects me. Like living in Texas is part of that.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to.
Is it hard to cover Texas politics as a woman and be like, and see, this is what the Democrats are trying to do, and this is what the Republicans are trying to do. When, like, I had to Zamizdat order, abortion pills. Like, it's hard to write about it as though it's a thing that they're trying to call out a part of me. I keep on bringing back to abortion, but of course, like economic issues are the same way, like you pointed out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's kind of both and. I don't mean to suggest that there's anything that it's like that I only think about politics in a horse racy way of like, oh, they're doing this. Isn't that interesting? It's more, I think where I'm coming from in this moment, 81 days before the election, I think I know that a lot of people have moved on. I'm still pretty pissed that we didn't get to have a rigorous democratic public conversation about the issues that matter most to people who vote in the Democratic primary, because there is a lot going on, and I'm not mad at Kamala Harris because of that. But I do continue to be pretty cynical about the Democratic Party and the people who've been in power in Washington the last 4 years, because they withheld that from us, right? So we are being activated by the things that the campaign consultants have decided we ought to be activated about, instead of giving us a more months to kind of hash it out together.
I mean, that's the only place like I quibble is like we're being activated by the stuff they're telling us to be activated about. Like I think that talking about abortion and stuff is something that came from the ground up.
Yes, both and.
Like I think
yeah.
that came from the ground up. I think that a lot of healthcare stuff comes from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree about the lack of a primary. I agree about in general the ways that elites and both parties. This is a yes, let's do a both sides gesture for that. I don't really like that for a lot of things, but that this is not a political system in which everyday people get to have a say, for the most part, right? It's funny, like I will say I want Kamala to win. That's just straight up. I want that. If it's the first time you watch the show, welcome to the show. But it's been a long time since I considered myself like a Democrat, and I know you personally didn't ever join a political party.
Yeah, I think I was in college a Democrat, but since I became a journalist in 2005. So I think I've been an independent.
Kind of older than you. I'm so much older.
We're both perimenopausal plus.
That's true. This is 2004. I was covering the Democratic convention, covering it. I was a blogger, but I was like a liberal blogger. I didn't mind people knowing that. I guess I've never minded people knowing that. You personally have seen a lot of changes in journalism. I know.
Yeah.
Again, both of the same general age range on a form, I suppose. And part of that is that you didn't you left behind a party identity, and when you became a journalist, which is kind of a cyclical thing almost in American journalism. Like there were times where people.
I think that people who are 10 years younger than me might not have, they don't think of it.
And
this
people
way.
100 years older than us also wouldn't really understand,
Mm-hmm.
like not having an
Mm-hmm.
allegiance to a particular ideology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually just as interested in, I think they're related, the structural reasons that maybe happened and the structural ways that journalism has changed, which is sort of the emergence of, we are no longer independent necessarily in political view, but we are a lot more independent in the way that journalism is produced, right? Like your show, my show, a lot of stuff out there, like institutions can no longer be relied upon to support journalism necessarily, right? There's a lot more atomization.
Less editing.
And when I say atomization, part of me means like, yes, like sort of indie startup stuff, but also like literally just not as many people working on stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel it. And I feel it on the audience side too, like the atomization of audience. You find your clubhouse and you hang out there with your people, and you might not hear a lot of information that is being shared in other channels. Yeah, and I think in a lot, it's been fun to be. It's been interesting to interesting. I keep saying that. Fun. Maybe interesting is my word for like I don't know how I feel about it.
Or I think interesting is either I don't know how I feel about it, or I don't want to say yet how I feel.
Yeah, or that it contains too many things that contradict each other.
I can't know how to say. I don't know how to say. I don't know how to quite articulate how I feel about something. So,
yeah, I mean, I came up in journalism, at a time when all my friends I'd meet at the bars. I was in public radio. They worked for the local newspaper. We covered the state legislature in West Virginia together, and then they started having, all my print colleagues left the industry because local and regional papers got totally destroyed. And then public radio was like the strong, we had the wind at our backs, and then podcasting.
It had the funding.
And then we found all new sorts of funding because of cheap money with 0% interest rates and the podcasting promise. And so I've benefited hugely from that opening up of opportunity for just creative expression and different ways to unpack things with audiences and listeners. And then that, has slowed. That came to an end, that period of great expansion. And now,
it's slowed is one way to put it.
It has slowed. It has. I mean,
interesting that you use the word slow.
Well, because it didn't stop for me, and it hasn't stopped for some people.
It's been an unequal distribution of speed.
So and inequality, and like the inequality of what you can earn as a journalist is just startling. But I jumped from one institution to another institution. I'm still an institutionalist because now I'm at Slate with Essex and Money. And I really like working with a company, and I like having colleagues, and I like having an HR department.
And they just had layoffs.
Slate did just have layoffs. Yes. Yeah. Slate is not immune. And
I don't bring that, and I'm not calling it. I'm just like, everywhere the jobs are getting shed.
Everywhere the jobs are getting shed, and the business model lasts for 2 quarters, and you've got to come up with a new plan, and consumers and people who like journalism are being asked to personally pay $10 a month for everything they like. And it's a lot to ask of people at a time when affordability is a concern.
And you're an audio person, and in my life, I started out in college radio. I mean, so I've always had like some audio storytelling and some, writing going in my life. But you didn't even mention the newsletter phenomenon, which is like my personal pet peeve, and talk about atomization.
Yeah.
Like,
so because I kind of am into newsletters now.
How many do you subscribe to?
I don't even know. It's so many.
How many do you read on a regular basis?
I think I read about 4 to 5 a day. But I'm combining, journalism outlets, newsletters, and ones that are by, sole proprietor, but because I think my newsletter subscription habit has been my response to the way that, my anxiety that I'm not getting full pictures. So I try to subscribe to lots of different conversations. And I like it better than Twitter.
Well, Twitter right now is just unusable. It's just unusable. Like I logged in because promoting the show on it is good, but it as a thing to read, it is like visually unusable. It's just anyway.
Yeah.
So that's really impressive that you read and subscribe to that many newsletters. I'm going to remind myself that is part of both of our jobs, kind of, to just read that much news on a regular basis. My issue with newsletters. I know.
Remember newspapers?
I know. Is that so when the layoffs started happening like 3 or 4 years, it's been, the pandemic made it especially bad. I would say I started noticing it in the pandemic. But like I got let go from MTV News right after Trump got elected. That was the first layoff I was part of. But then the podcast boom happened. I was okay for a long time. When my friends got laid off and started newsletters, I was like, click. I've got $5 a month for my friend I would just go out for coffee with usually. So boom, 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 boom. And then I realized I was spending more on newsletters than I was on my New York Times subscription. And more people got laid off. And I couldn't keep paying all of my friends $5 a month. And I couldn't keep looking at my inbox every day.
Yeah.
And some of their stuff wasn't very good. Because I got approached by Substack at one point, but I was like having too much fun doing podcasting to like what I thought to do a newsletter as well. Their request was 3 a week.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And actually, everyone who got brought on as part of the massive, like when they're paying people a lot of money, it was 3 a week. And they still say that that's like the ideal amount of newsletters a week. No one can produce 3 newsletters worth of good content a week.
Yeah.
For it. And so and now there's all these things coming in the most popular newsletters right now are actually like group newsletters. Which, congratulations, you've started a magazine.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing is that talk about atomization, you're losing editors, you're losing bullpens, like you're losing that back and forth among people that can sometimes make an idea better. Like they will not save journalism.
No.
Independent, in a way, like independent publications in and of themselves, I worry as the place that we go.
Do I?
I'm not an institutionalist. What I am is actually probably a universal basic incomist. Because I think that would make journalism better. But
yeah, I think that some of the conversation in California about different ways to fund journalism by making tech players pay is
wonderful.
A very good conversation to have. Because if you don't have advertisers and you don't have Google clicks because of the AI landing page, and if your listeners and readers are all being asked to pay for 80 different newsletters, podcasts, streaming services, etc., it's a race to the bottom.
Yeah. And there's a question of like who owns all of it too. Didn't we get to that? Like who owns all that content? I write for Flaming Hydra. You familiar with
I'm
Flaming Hydra?
not. What's that? Tell me about
Flaming
that.
Hydra is a cooperative newsletter. It is, we own our own content. It's just part of a newsletter that they send out, and those subscriptions get split equally among us. No
Mhm.
matter what we write, no matter how popular any one person's column is.
Uh-huh.
One person's column goes viral, great.
Everybody's wins. Uh-huh.
Everybody wins. And that viral column belongs to the person that wrote it. So if they want to use it someplace else, sell it, make it a book, make it a podcast, whatever.
Is
They
it
get
based on
something.
Substack? Do you use Substack?
No,
What's your platform that you use?
I don't know. It might be just like something that they cooked up. There's people who are pretty smart who.
That's cool. Huh. Well, what you're describing, to go back to the thing that I have been thinking about a lot is in this election is my personal politics. I'm trying to create a sort of system where I think about how to move out of zero-sum thinking and how to think more about relational thinking. And the reason, I have it here, my phone, I'm going to be backwards, but I got this sticker from this climate activist artist named Autumn Laker earlier. It's called Says the Future is Relational. And it, to me, when I saw the sticker, I was like, oh, that's truly what I believe. I believe that we've got to get out of like this zero-sum thinking. We also have to recognize that if one party beats one party in one election, you all still live in the same place and you're going to have to figure out how to govern together. And so how do you communicate to one another? How do you talk about each other? How do you create durable policy, that won't get just turned over with executive orders over and over again? So that's when you're describing a collective, it's interesting to me. Interesting. I'm struck by how that is like so not my innate training of how to think about my own pathways to achievement, or how I think about how my first steps of thinking about ambition. It's whether it's through like what social media has taught us about, it's about our own particular brands or about just making it in capitalist America. You got to like take care of your own. And I think that's fueled grievance politics in lots of ways, instead of being like, well, what outcomes do we want in our community, and what different roles might we play in that? That's what I've been thinking about a lot. So I like that you're do you find being in a collective, are you having to learn how to do it? Does it feel?
Well, they're making it very easy because like all I have to do is turn in a couple columns a month. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they are edited. But they are like, costs are contained by the fact that like they've hired I think there's 60 of us, and they're well-known enough quantities that they just kind of trust us to write pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a pretty good sense of like what it is that it might be compelling to others.
Mm-hmm.
But like what I wrote about is like I had a psychotic break last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went up writing about that, which is something that I'd wanted to write about, but like, how do you pitch that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially if you're someone who's not necessarily known for writing about that kind of stuff, and it's really tender and not something that I necessarily want to like go over. I want to be very in control of like how I talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that felt very supportive and very good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I might write about politics next, but I get to do that. And having a home is the part where I feel the collective, and having some group of people be like, we trust you. Like, we just trust you to write and go wherever you want to go with it.
The way it's distributed, is it just out on the internet? Did you feel kind of like you were soft pedaling who you were sending this tender story out to first? Or did you just feel like you were pulling the Band-Aid off and like, I protected my process and now I'm ready to share this with the whole internet?
It was like protecting my process. And now it is, well, it's you have to subscribe.
Uh-huh. Okay.
It's paywalled. Except they unpaywall some things. But for me, it's the process and not that product that I am more protective of. clearly, I just mentioned psychotic break. I'm okay with people knowing that now, a year away, especially. But the way that I talk about it and what I put out there, that's the part I want control over.
Mhm.
Right? Now, other people have also written about pretty tender stuff. There's like novelists like Alexander Chee is one of the people on it. Emily Bell. I'm trying to remember other Luke O'Neill. Names that if you're very online, you might recognize. Some of them are also just successful, again, like novelists and journalists out there. But it is the structure of the thing that's communal. The process somewhat, but structure matters, right? Because it's, I think, structure that creates the take economy that we have now, right? Which is, again, so there's this parallel of like a lot of people can't afford literally to be truly apolitical independent journalists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or they can't afford to be in relationship like the way you're describing, because it requires that there's some pool of revenue, that you're not just a freelancer, like doing things for $200 a few times a month, hustling with all
I mean, to be
sorts.
fair, like right now, Flaming Hydra just pays me a couple $100, but it's the model,
Yeah.
right? That's how
Yeah.
much I make for any op-ed, by the way. For most people, like op-ed, New York Times tops out at $800, right? For an op-ed.
Is that less than it used to be?
No, it's the same as it used to be.
$800. That's not very much money.
And I had a story go viral. I wrote a piece about Hunter Biden a year and change ago that did real well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I got a couple $50 here and there from places that reprinted it.
Can I ask you a healthcare policy question? And you can choose not to answer it if you choose not to.
Sure. Is it about periods? Because I love talking about periods.
Well, it's about, we were talking about periods and abortion, which is a healthcare issue. I'm wondering, having gone through what you went through, and, when you have mental health crises, you engage with broken systems. And are there ways in which you wish people running for office were talking about mental health care and the mental health care system? That just
mental health care is healthcare, right?
Right.
I am very fortunate in that, I had money from a book deal and I have insurance through my ex-husband. But that's just me being real lucky.
And that's time limited resources.
Yeah.
So I
couldn't
lucky
work
is the
for
right
a
word.
while.
Yeah.
Right. But I had a stack of money that I could look at. And I think destigmatizing mental health care as healthcare is part of the conversation. But I think for a lot of people who have chronic mental health issues, I hate kind of framing it that way, but for people who have had a lot of interaction with mental health care apparatus, I think we understand intuitively that it is healthcare. And that what I want to hear from a politician is just, you're covered. Whether it's breaking a leg or breaking a brain, like, you are going to get the coverage that you deserve, and you're going to be allowed to recover for the amount of time that you deserve. Right? Maybe that's something that I just wish everyone knew, that those things are not very different, really.
You're covered and you have access to providers, and you don't.
Yeah. You're right. Not just coverage, but that you have access to providers that you can trust, that you are going to be treated with dignity. Like right now for mental health care stuff, there's actually not a lot. You just get put in something really bad, they're just going to lock you up somewhere, and not everyone needs to be locked up, right? Even if they're in crisis. So I don't know. Like, what's your experience?
I mean, I've had my mental health. I've had therapy covered by insurance. Now I have Kaiser in California. So maybe if I could commit a month to being on the phone, I could find a way to have a therapy appointment covered by insurance. So it's out of pocket. It's been out of pocket for years. And, I've had many people close to me who either themselves or love people who, it's like just stuck in that cycle of like acute crisis, care for some time limited amount of time, then very poor follow-up, and just feeling like they're on their own.
Yeah. I've discovered the very strong mutual aid community here in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually what really helped. One of the things that really helped me, because there is a group that will help people who need to go to the hospital for whatever reason take care of their pets.
That's cool. How did you get connected to those people? Mutual aid.
I called one of the mental health services in town, and they were like, "Oh, and by the way, like it's not an official service."
It
They were
wasn't
like,
official. And like, what a source of stress for people. I mean, your pet is such an important. And like, I don't want to be away from home for 3 days because it was going to happen to my cat. And that it was an oh, by the way thing. Yeah.
You can call this other place,
Yeah.
and they will help you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So we've covered a lot.
Did
Do
we
you have anything
cover?
else
Did
to
you
add?
want to talk about periods more? Did we uncover that?
I could talk about periods forever. Periods and not having periods.
Uh-huh.
Just the absence of periods and periods. There is no other way to be. It's either you're having a period or you're not having a period. It's just most men just never know what it's like to not to have one. Do we talk about journalism enough for you? We talk about community enough for you?
I mean, I could talk about journalism and community all the time. I mean, I guess I'll end on a not cynical note. Here's what I think. Here's of all the sort of message tested talking points that I found really compelling is I really found when like the rollout with Tim Walz and his focus on his National Guard service and his public education service and his coaching service and just the word service, that line in his, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was some attack line on Trump, but it was like, rather than trying to enrich yourself, let's talk about service. And I found that like, it almost felt like an exhale, like, I'm really excited to think about ways that we shift the frame collectively to thinking about how to be more of service to one another, like, because that's part of the relational future. It's like thinking about it can't just be about scarcity and what do I need to get mine, and you're withholding that from me, so I'm against you. So I find that I'm really excited about that.
I am too. And one of the exciting things about Tim Walz is that he is an example of service in everyday acts, and service without an eye towards what will this service get me
Resume
later.
building. Exactly.
You don't
Which
join
was-
the National Guard at
Yeah.
18 because
Yeah.
you think you're going to be vice president someday.
Yeah.
You don't become a high school teacher because you think you're going to be vice president someday, right? You don't like become a sponsor for the Gay Straight Student Alliance in 1999 because you think you're going to be vice president someday. And those are all small acts of daily support and daily service that are they're admirable, but also what I hope people see is that they are doable right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I'm sure you know, as someone who's thinking about the relationality of climate change, what happens a lot in climate change activism is people who are not intimately involved in it are like, oh my God, too big. Poof, I'm out. Right? We're all going to die. Never mind. Right? And you have to give people hope and give people like an idea of like, this is like just a project that we're working on every day. I think it's Naomi Klein that has the metaphor of victory gardens, like during World War II. Like, no one was like, oh my God, we have to solve the food crisis, right? It was like, oh, we're going to, everyone just, if they can, start a victory garden, right? And that's also, all of that, and that's community too, right? I think maybe we should just call them victory gardens again. Imagine like how cool that would be. And how good for climate.
I know. It'd bring the farmers and ranchers and the farm to table snobs together,
then we'd all start cycling together. There,
Yeah.
boom, did it. All right, Anna Sale. It is 81 days until the election. You're the host of Sex. You're the host of Sex. You're the host of Death, Sex, and Money. And the author of Let's Talk About Hard Things. And thank you for talking to me about hard things today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Donald Trump sees the world a little differently than us. First of all, he doesn't know the first thing about service. He doesn't have time for it because he's too busy serving himself.
Thanks for watching / listening to 90 Days with Ana Marie Cox. Please like and subscribe if you're watching. Please rate and review and subscribe if you're listening. Tell your friends and neighbors, make t-shirts, and we'll see you next week.